Welcome to Shift, a college admissions ACT, SAT, and CLT podcast for a changing world. I'm Tyler, the founder of Achievable, and we have affordable ACT and CLT courses that include everything you need to ace your exam. A full textbook, tons of review questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, videos on key topics, a built in study planner, and full length practice exams. You can try them out for free by going to achievable.me. Now, let's get started. Today we got Christina Chestnut with us, and Christina, I'd love if you could introduce yourself and your company.
So I'm Christina Chestnut. I am the founder and principal of Chestnut Consulting, which is a New York state-based tutoring company. So I work individually with students all over the world remotely and been in business close to 20 years now. So have been through lots of different iterations of these various standardized tests
Mm,
and specialized a lot in SAT and ACT, but also do some other tests beyond that. So SSAT, IC, GRE, etc.
mhm.
So thank you, Tyler, for having me on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I'm excited to talk about this today, which is mastering grammar questions for the SAT and ACT. So, I guess let's take it from the top, right? When you are talking about this with your clients, what are the big things that you first kind of want to impart on people? Like, what are the things they should know?
The first thing that I want people to know is that what they hear in their mind is not to be trusted, at least
Mhm,
initially. A lot of students try to approach grammar from the perspective of what sounds right. But the problem is that colloquial grammar that they have in texting or even just chatting with their friends isn't necessarily correct,
mhm.
right? So we have to kind of learn this whole other grammar. And also, like, a lot of kids don't even learn grammar in school anymore. So I find I have to sort of start from square one as far as where what grammar even is. So but the very first thing, other than don't trust your ear, that I teach kids is you need to read all of the words,
Mhm,
right? Don't skip them. And in fact, to the point where when you're doing it, and this is applicable on both the SAT and the ACT, there's always going to be either an underlined word or phrase or a blank that you have to fill in. And you have to read all the way to the period.
mhm,
All right. Because I'll tell you this right now, if you stop mid sentence, there are so many questions on both of these tests that you will get wrong because you didn't consider what happened after the blank.
mhm,
So that's also a big habit that I have to, I have to impart. So I always say it first because I'm like, okay, this is the bottom line. You got to read all the way to the period.
mhm,
Then we'll work on understanding what grammar is actually present. Um, yeah, so that's the very first thing.
mhm. Okay. Yeah, and I think that is a really good thing to point out. What's the second thing? Let's jump into that.
So the second thing is, what is a sentence?
Hmm.
Okay. So, because honestly, I will find that some people know and some people don't, right? And so, what a sentence is it's just a subject and a verb, right? So, a subject being a thing that does an action, and the
Hmm.
verb is the action that it does. And so, if it doesn't have those two things, it can't be a sentence in English. And so the SAT and the ACT will play around a lot with that, especially around punctuation. And you really have to stick to your guns, right? Like you can't be like, well, but this time I like it. It's
Hmm.
like, no, no, but it doesn't have a subject and a verb, so it's not a sentence. But they'll also kind of pivot those expectations on their head because they will sometimes also give you a very, very short sentence, like it works.
Hmm.
Students will be like, "That's how can that be a sentence?" And I'm like, "Well, so it is a subject. It's a person, place, or thing, right? It
Hmm.
works, an action that it can take. That means it's a whole sentence.
Hmm.
So that means we have to be okay with that." So really the big lesson though is that they find ways to undermine your expectations. And so you really have to keep always coming back to the rules to make sure that you're not falling into traps as far as, just assuming something is a sentence when it's not, or vice versa.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as we get into this, right? One of the
Mhm.
things that we talked about in the prep for this podcast was basically that you don't need to know everything, right? And so I'd love to kind of talk about that. Like, what are the things maybe that you see other your students getting taught that they don't need to know, or like what are the key things you do need to know, maybe, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you
no,
just talked about them a little bit, but I think just like
yeah, no,
enumerating it.
that's a great question. So one of the things that I see kids getting caught up all the time, like they'll come to me like, Christina, I am so nervous about comma rules. And I'm like, well, there are a lot of them.
Hmm.
So the way we're going to approach this is to see how we can try to avoid learning every single one, but how can we work backwards? How can we work smart to make it that we don't have to emphasize that as much?
Hmm.
Okay. So a big thing that often comes up, it's more on the SAT at this point than the ACT, is seeing a set of answer choices where it'll be the same exact words in each one, but each one has a different punctuation in it. Okay,
Hmm.
so I actually have, for example, here, it's a question. I'll read it to you. Okay, it's not too
Hmm.
long. It says, in her two major series, Memory Test and Autobiography, painter Howardina Pindle explores themes of healing, self discovery, and memory by cutting and sewing back together pieces of canvas and inserting personal artifacts, such as postcards, into some of the paintings. Okay. So the underline is under the of. So explored themes of healing, self-discovery, and memory.
Hmm.
But each of the answer choices has a different punctuation. There's a comma, there's a nothing, there's a dash, and there's a colon. Okay. So when a student looks at this, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll immediately look at the comma and they'll say, but I don't know what comma rule this is.
Hmm.
And I say to them, look, why don't we start with the ones where the rules are very well defined? Okay.
Hmm.
So semicolons, colons, periods, dashes, there are extremely specific times that we use those pieces of punctuation. And the rules are very clear, right? You use a period to demarcate this two different sentences, right? You use a dash. There's two ways to use a dash. I don't necessarily have to get into that now. There's two things you can do with a semicolon. There's one thing to do with a colon. So it's very limited.
Hmm.
So why not start with those? Let's look at those first because they're easier to either eliminate
Hmm.
or to definitively say this is the right answer because the rules are so clear.
Hmm.
Okay. So that's one approach that I try to take. I like to think of it a little bit as an engineering approach, right? Like, don't focus on the things you can't fix or the things that are as the hardest things, right? Like, focus
Hmm.
on the easy things first.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times that'll get you the answer with so much less stress than being like, wait, are these framing commas or is this or is this that, right? Like, it's okay. We don't even need to know that.
Hmm.
So anyway, that's a big one that I try to get people to understand. So, I try to go through all the different punctuation rules and things like that and, start with that first, but not the commas. The commas come last.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I mean, I think basically it's triage to an extent, right? And that's what makes, I think, diagnosing the type of grammar question really important. And I'd love to talk a little bit about that. Can you tell me more about how you approach or you teach, I guess, diagnosing questions to help people kind of figure this stuff out?
And actually, it's really funny. To me, diagnosing the question, like type, often comes just from looking at the answer choices, which
Hmm.
is to me hilarious because so many students, they don't even look at them. They just read
Hmm.
the text and then they don't even look at the answer choices and then they don't know what kind of question it is. I'm like, well, if you just look at the answer choices, then you'll know, right? So, for instance, on the SAT, if it's a punctuation question, right? If all you're trying to do, because those are called boundaries questions according to the SAT,
Hmm.
then every single one will have the same words in the same order. And all that varies is what punctuation is there, either in a different place or varying just in the same spot, but in each different answer choice, right? If it's a question that is about verb form, then
Hmm.
every single answer choice will simply be a different form of the same verb. Those are like most of them right there. And then commas ones are usually very specific comma rules. Okay.
Hmm.
And so there's one that's kind of fun that I can go over with you guys that is really obvious, which is why I like to teach it, because it's one that's like, okay, well, if you know this, then you will see it every single time. Um, but this one shows up a lot on both the ACT and the SAT. And what it is I call it the job title person's name rule. Okay.
Hmm.
So the rule is this: if you see a job title, and then right after that job title is a person's name, okay, then the person's name only gets commas around it if the job title is unique to that person.
Hmm.
Okay. So, for example, if you see the first president of the United States, George Washington,
Hmm.
right? The job title, first president of the United States, that is a unique job title. It only applies to a single person. So we put commas around George Washington because we don't need to know his name, right? So it's
Hmm.
extra information. We put commas around the name. But for example, to pull from an ACT question, there's one from one of the recent practice tests that the ACT posted online. It starts the passage: Pittsburgh resident Eric Singer is a technologist who creates robotic instruments.
Hmm.
Now, Pittsburgh resident isn't necessarily a job title, but it acts as a job title. And
Hmm.
so then you think to yourself, hey, is Pittsburgh resident only applicable to this guy, Eric Singer? The
Right.
answer is no. So we can't put commas around his name because we need his name to know who the passage is talking about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, it's not the only Pittsburgh resident.
Right, exactly. That'd be a really small city. But weirdly enough, this type of question comes up all the time, right? On the old version of the ACT before they shortened it, I saw it upwards of 3 times on a single English section. On the new version, I've seen it twice now, even though there's only 40, like what, 50 questions now. Still twice. That's a huge percentage of the questions are that one
Hmm.
rule, right? And
Yeah.
it shows up on almost every single SAT. So it's like a super high value, completely random rule that they totally care about. So
Yeah. Good to know. Yeah, and I mean, I think
yeah.
that it's just important to like nail these like tactics, like is what I would call them, right? To understand
Mhm.
like, oh, this is this type of question, it's asking this type of thing. What am I looking for?
Yeah, and so like another type that comes up a lot that I mentioned a little bit was the subject verb agreement.
Hmm.
And I will caution those tend to be the trickiest. Okay?
Mm.
And partly because they will purposely structure the questions to make you think, if you're not reading carefully, that the subject is not what it actually is.
Hmm.
Okay. So for example, in this one, this is from, one of the SATs, the static PDFs that the College Board has posted online. The blank says, so it says, interestingly, the triangle representing the mountain itself, blank among the few defined features in her paintings. So that's just the section that has the blank in it.
Hmm.
So the issue with that is that if you're just reading really quickly, you might not catch that the subject of the verb is actually the triangle, which comes like much earlier in the sentence, meaning we need a singular verb.
Hmm.
Okay. And so I can show you more examples, but they're not always the easiest to read out loud. But the key is that a lot of times, if you just look at the answer choices, as we were saying before with diagnosing the question, you'll see that they'll be in sometimes different tenses and all of this, but 3 of them will be plural and one of them will be singular, or 3 of them will be singular and one of them will be plural. If you see that and you're really confused, you can sometimes just go with the one that's different. I don't usually push for that because that's a little risky, um but generally speaking, it's not about the tense. A lot of students want it to be about the tense and immediately are like, well, this one's in the past, so it has to be this one.
Hmm.
But you always want to find that subject first because it's much more often about the number
Hmm.
and in the agreement, not about the tense. What I always say is if you find the subject, you find and then you agree, you make it agree And you can't settle on just one. Then you can look at the tens. But you have to start by doing the number thing first, because that
Hmm.
is much more likely to get you to the right answer immediately.
Right. Well, and I think it's just like that has to be true, right?
Mhm.
The other
Yeah.
thing, the other stuff that you were talking about might be true, probably is true. The subject verb agreement has to be the same.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's why we start with that. Again, just thinking of it from an engineering perspective is like, do the things that are definite first, right? Because then a lot of times you just settle on the answer and then you can call it a day.
Yeah. Well, great. I think we're ready for some example questions. What do you think? Is there anything that we haven't covered yet?
I think that kind of covers the basic things that I wanted to kind of lay out there. So, yeah, we can certainly do some practice questions.
All right, great. Yeah. Do you want to start with ACT or SAT? I feel like we should do
I
one
think,
exam at a time, unless you're trying to teach specific rules and order.
yeah, I mean, that's fine. Why don't we do a couple examples of subject verb agreement from the ACT and then we can look at the SAT,
Sure.
and kind of, yeah. Okay, let me read this example. So, this is from test two that the ACT recently published on their website. It is from the English section and it is question number 32. So the full text of the question says, when the excavation was complete, the remnants of the ship was said to be, where was said to be is underlined, restored and reconstructed for display in a Sicilian museum.
Hmm.
So if we look at the answer choices, as we said, right, like that's how we diagnose the problem, is we see that the first one is was said to be, the second is was ready to be, the third is were, and the last is was. And all of these are verbs. So that
Hmm.
means we know we're dealing with subject verb agreement. So we have to find the subject, right? If we want
Hmm.
to make them agree, we got to know what the subject is. Now, if you look, the ACT has set this up to like try to trick you a little bit, because the subject is that first noun in the sentence, the remnants,
Hmm.
right, which is plural. But then directly after that it says of the ship, which is singular, and then is the verb. So if you're just reading through quickly, you might think that ship is the verb, and then you'd be like, but there's all these different singular verbs. But guess what? We need a plural one because the actual subject is remnants.
Hmm.
So that leads us to the correct answer of were, which agrees with remnants.
Right.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, is there anything tricky about that you want to call out, or is it
Well, really,
pretty
just the
straightforward?
tricky part is making sure that you're not letting yourself get fooled into thinking that that object of the preposition right before the verb is the subject, right?
Hmm.
Because they very, very frequently do that, is have like long dependent clauses
Right.
between the subject and verb. So you actually have to go back and hunt for that subject. So my recommendation is don't just assume that it's whatever noun is closest to the verb. Go all the way back to the beginning and make sure you pick the right one, the one that's doing the action that the verb is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I feel like this is also why like annotating is really important. I mean, it's one of the things we teach in our course is like how to annotate these questions properly. Do you feel like
Mhm.
that could be helpful here?
Yeah, absolutely. Because then you could always cross out that, anything that you find in between the subject and the verb, leaving just the subject and the verb so that then you know that they agree, right? Like that,
Hmm.
and also that you found the right one. But yeah, absolutely. Annotating is very intelligent, and also like, making marks to the side, maybe saying like singular subject or, whatever,
Hmm.
like to make it clear to yourself of what it is that you're trying to find.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, let's keep going then if you want to start on the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. So either I guess I'll do a second one. It has a very similar structure.
Sure.
Again, from the ACT. This is from the test one that is on the PDF online. Is question 21. And it says, after the last one of the notes fades into the darkening sky, comma, and then it goes on and there's a second blank. So I'm just going to stop there.
Hmm.
So if we look, after the last one of the notes, the fades is what's underlined
Hmm.
into the darkening sky. Then the answer choices are fades, have disappeared, disappear, and fade. So again, we know immediately this is subject verb agreement, so we have to find the subject.
Hmm.
So similarly to the one we just did, the noun that's right next to the verb is notes, which is plural.
Hmm.
But the subject is one, which is earlier in the sentence and is singular. So we have to pick the singular verb.
Hmm. Right.
Okay. But you see, like the same structure is what's coming up again, giving us the correct answer of fades, by the way. But we have that same structure again of like we have to go way back to find that subject to make sure that it agrees with the verb.
That makes a lot of sense.
Um, yeah, well, good. So let me see if I can find a good one from the SAT here. So in the SAT, they're even a little bit more extreme with how far back you have to go to find
Hmm.
the subject. So this one is from a static version of test 5, module 1, question 24. I'll just read the second sentence, which has the blank in it. It says, such iconic references cited in rapid and frenetic procession by the musician who is seated impassively at a dinner table, blank, key moments and personalities of the 20th century.
Hmm.
So in this, you have to go all the way back to where it says such iconic references, right? That's
Hmm.
plural. There's several dependent clauses separated out by commas, and then we have the verb. But since references is plural, we need the plural verb, which is represent, because all the rest of them in the answer choices are singular. But you see, it's the same kind of mental idea of like they make you search far back to find the subject, but you have to make sure that you find the right one to agree with the verb.
Hmm. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have another example handy?
I think I might have one more of the subject verb agreement. Yes, I do. So this is also question 24,
Hmm.
but I don't know. I didn't write which test it's from. I just wrote it's question 24. But I will read you the sentence. It's very
Hmm.
long, as they are known to do. In her 1983 book, The Managed Heart Commercialization of Human Feeling, sociologist Arlie Russell Hochschild first explored at length her conception of a sociology of emotions, the idea that the various cultural and ideological frameworks a person has internalized, class, gender, political affiliation, etc., blank each emotional reaction that person has within a situation.
Hmm.
So this one is really tough because there is a dash in the middle of the sentence and the underline comes after the dash. So something we didn't get into today is rules about dashes, but dashes separate parts of a sentence away from each other. So since our
Hmm.
blank is after the dash, we're not worried at all about what happened before the dash. We have to think of it as self-contained.
Hmm.
So within that, it starts with the idea that the various cultural and ideological frameworks a person has internalized blank each emotional reaction that person has within a situation. So there's so many nouns, right? You might think
Hmm.
it's idea, frameworks, internalized. So it turns out the only noun that can work is frameworks. So
Hmm.
frameworks, the idea that the various cultural and ideological frameworks a person has internalized, class, gender, political affiliation, etc., blank each emotional reaction that person has within a situation, right? It's so long, it's so wordy, and it's such a clause within a clause within a clause situation here. So, if you initially just say, okay, well, it's got to be the first noun, you'd pick its idea. But
Hmm.
then there's a that right after idea. So now we're inside this clause that begins with that. So if we read that, the first noun we come to within that clause is frameworks. So frameworks then must be the subject to this verb. And since frameworks is plural, then we need a plural verb. And then we know that it does make sense to say frameworks underlie. That is
Hmm.
what is happening as the action in that sentence. So anyway, like I said, they get very sort of matryoshka dolly in this, but the goal is still the same. You got to find the subject of that verb in order to figure out which verb is right.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a really good demonstration. I really like these examples. Is there anything else that we haven't covered today that you want to make sure that we cover?
I mean, really, what I want to leave everyone with is the idea that, like, there are not that many rules that you have to master in order to get good at the grammar on these tests, right?
Hmm.
And getting really stressed out about comma rules isn't always going to get you the answer, right? So,
Hmm.
really focusing on subject verb agreement, other types of punctuation, and what makes a sentence in the first place is really a huge help towards improving your grammar score without even that much work. So, I encourage everybody to try to think of it from that perspective because it does make it a much more manageable experience.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been Shift, a college admissions podcast for a changing world, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Christina Chestnut from Chestnut Consulting. And you can get a free trial of Achievable's ACT and CLT courses at achievable.me